How can we all develop ourselves further and reach a state of satisfaction and contentment without hurting that self, but by honoring and nurturing it together? If you ask me, this awareness is actually enough. I remember when we were kids, we used to pray wearing short-sleeved shirts or t-shirts. The elders would come and warn us, saying things like, "That's improper," and so on. Even back then, I realized that praying with short sleeves had nothing to do with being improper. We put all our children through a standard education process in preschool and kindergarten. This process actually dulls most of their abilities. In other words, education is defined as intentional enculturation.
Hello to everyone from Istanbul School. Dear viewers, today we will be talking about the concepts of I, self, and we in the context of the 7th verse of Surah Ash-Shams. Our guest is Professor Dr. Şaban Ali Düzgün. Hello, Professor.
Hello.
Today, Professor, we would like to discuss in the context of the 7th verse of Surah Ash-Shams. There are some concepts like I, self, and we. How do you relate these concepts, first of all? What does it mean to be I? What does it mean to attain selfhood or to break away from the self? What do you think?
Yes, in the verse, it says, "Di nefsin vima sevaha." I want to focus on just this one verse here and then expand on it. The word sevaha specifically refers to the powers and strengths given to the self and includes the process of its being balanced or set right. When we think about this philosopher of selfhood, as he is known in the 20th century, and why he focused so much on the concept of self, actually, the topic we'll discuss today is not just about deciphering the inner depths or psychological structure of a person. I want to try to give it a meaning beyond that. I'm talking about Muhammad Iqbal. Most of Muhammad Iqbal's major works, which have also been translated into Turkish, were published by his Bankasi Publishing. Mystery of Hudi. The Secrets of the Ego. This self, first of all, let's say, what is the smallest unit of society?
Family.
It's the family. Within the family, every child, and every parent as well, is a self. But before we get to the family, that individual self, each child, each mother, each father, each one is, first and foremost, a self in God's plan of creation. In other words, the self, existence itself, first exists in God's plan of creation, and God bestows it upon them. He sees it as valuable. He designs and creates it as a self, an individual, a unique being, autonomous and independent from everyone else, from the family, from society, from the state, from any community, and from religion. Now, I think we need to pay attention to this when establishing the relationship between I and we. And that is this: the refinement of the human self, the I, in other words. All powers are given to it. Then, these powers are brought into balance. This is what is meant by refinement. What kind of powers do we have? All kinds: destructive, consuming, constructive, creative, life-giving, right? Think about people. We have all of them within us. But my constructive, creative, and life-building initiatives are also, at the same time, connected to the group we call US, the group I belong to. Starting first with the family, then my neighborhood, the community I belong to, the society I am part of, and the state, all try to shape and standardize this self within me according to their own norms. But God says that each individual has been refined and balanced with their own unique abilities and endowments. And the soul in the one who proportioned it, all the abilities embedded within it, all the talents hidden inside it, and I swear by this, it means the following. Everything that is sworn upon has an active value in this world. There are things it must do, expectations placed upon it. Here, too, the soul has such power and capability. But then there are also the values that my neighborhood, my society, assigns and imposes on me. There are expectations.
There are roles.
There are roles and so on. Now, what I mean is this. There may be an overlap between what society assigns to me and expects from me, and what God assigns to me and expects from me. There could also be a perfect conflict. In that case, I need to prioritize what God has assigned to me. Because that is my nature, that is my essence. And when what is in my nature and essence comes to light, what we call the self will emerge. Most of the time, the society we live in does not allow our self, our being, to fully realize its potential. On the contrary, what can it do? It can block or hinder it. If it can enable it, then that's an ideal society, which Farabi calls al-Madina al-Fadila. The question of the ideal virtuous society is this: why do we live as a we? Why do I's live as a we? Why do we live collectively? Why do we form a state? The answer he gives is this: so that each I, that is, each individual, can benefit from the excesses, the virtues, and others and reach perfection by completing their own deficiencies. All right. So, if other I's or the we formed by those other individuals enable, on an individual level, the development, growth, and emergence of your, my, or our child's mind and sense of self, then this is an ideal and virtuous society. Could the opposite be true? It could. The opposite is possible, and that's what I'm trying to draw attention to. And that is this: autonomously, independently, individually created, meaning if there are 8 billion people in the world today, there are 8 billion separate potentials. There are 8 billion distinct selves. There are 8 billion unique dignities. That's how we need to look at it. But we standardize. A standard is this: everyone must conform to these standards. We say that this is what it means to be a society. But here's the risk. The standards we set and the standards inherent in a person's own nature often don't match up. So then, allow it, let it be. Let the abilities hidden in the settings of that self, that unique individual's own nature, the abilities that will manifest as thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors, come out. Let them develop.
Create space.
Create a space for them. Don't try to suppress everything new, everything that doesn't fit your own standards of thought or behavior. Don't try. Allow that self to manifest and reveal itself outwardly as an identity. This is the point I wanted to highlight here. That's why, for example, the Quran talks about Inshira. Inshira means an opening, an expansion. In our old texts, it actually means an operation, a surgery. You open it up. Let's put it this way: society has expectations of me, and it imposes them on me. And over time, those residues, those expectations, settle into me in ways that don't align with my natural disposition. Little by little, I start to adapt to the attitudes and behaviors of society that I don't even like, and I pick up habits in a mechanical way. Then I start to do those behaviors myself, the ones I didn't even like, because I've become a part of it. Let's say 30 people stayed together in a small room for a long time. We chatted for 5 hours. If someone comes in from outside, they might say, "Wow, the air in this room is really bad." They might say, "You're suffocating in here." But the people inside might not even notice. So, within society, we start to internalize and adopt behaviors that we used to find strange, as if this is what's supposed to be normal and standard. The Quran talks about a sense of relief, an inshira. In other words, subject yourself to a kind of operation, open up a sense of relief within yourself, and see how much of what's inside you has actually come from the outside. With that explanation, with that sense of relief, cast out those residues so you can breathe.
It's like when someone from outside comes in and opens a window, bringing a sense of freshness to the room. So, Professor, now you mentioned communities here, about being an individual. We see it as if, when a person in a community they belong to starts moving toward being a we, they lose their sense of self. Now, we're in the month of Ramadan. To give another example, family. You also mentioned family. Actually, while religion tells each of us to maintain our own acts of worship and our own understanding of faith as individuals, sometimes within society, with certain social roles, we might lose our individuality and become part of the group, acting according to that. During Ramadan, I especially want to highlight how much effort women put in and how tired they get, Professor. In other words, maybe we can see an example there of an identity sacrifice to social roles. Because, individually, we don't really see a woman spending Ramadan comfortably and fulfilling her acts of worship with ease. We see that, as part of society, women in the family become a profile that sacrifices and gives up their own identity for the sake of US. How should we interpret this, the relationship between I and we here?
As a moderator, should I bring up the discussion about identity and say, Professor, women go through a bit more hardship during Ramadan. Should we mention this too?
This is something should be mentioned.
The fact that you bring up whether we should mention it shows that your sense of self is still very much alive, which is nice and positive. This is all about balance and measure. People, these things happen in a family. During Ramadan, the burden on women in the family might be heavier. How can we lighten this load? How can we establish this balance? It's really a process that the family can decide on within itself. We must not forget that life is built on balance. God created everything, Kalakal Ard. He created the earth and everything on it, and Wada'i al-Mizan, He placed balance there. Elata gal fil mizan. Whatever you do, do not disrupt the balance. So this is our guiding principle. The verse says this as well. Our rational ability, our mind, also tells us this through our experience. Therefore, Ramadan is truly the month of proper worship. In order to prevent that worship from turning into a burden, to enjoy it, and to spread and share that joy with everyone, and to grow it, we must not forget that it is worship. This is a month of worship. So, when a woman enters the kitchen, she is preparing for that worship. Whether it's a woman or a man, when someone brings ingredients from outside into the kitchen, they are preparing for it. When a man helps his wife, he is preparing for it as well. All of these are parts of worship. So, it's right that you drew our attention to this. That sense of self, especially in our society, actually, it's the same in America too. I mean, we've experienced it. We know that when both husband and wife come home from work, it's still the woman who goes into the kitchen there. Women also join us. This balance is definitely related to people assigning roles to each other. It's about who does what well, how we support each other in that, but at the core, there is worship. Some of the texts that open up this discussion about the self use the term servitude, meaning being a servant to God, and consider the whole of life as a process of servitude. And they say that a person's awareness of being a servant to God can only truly happen with a serious awakening of the self. That's something truly profound. Servitude, devotion, not everyone can achieve that level of devotion. Because what does it require? You have to suppress your selfishness, you have to suppress your narcissism, and you need to feel that need for devotion. The self is overflowing there, and it dissolves into an existence beyond itself. During Ramadan, we have an opportunity for this servitude, this devotion to God, and to declare His divinity. In each of our families, this spirit, this servitude, and the declaration of divinity are embraced and accepted. So here, it doesn't matter if it's children, spouses, or people who aren't married. In other words, in every community where there are people, it's important to recognize that an act of worship is being performed and to speak with and support others accordingly. Ramadan should bring such spiritual abundance and blessing. With every step we take and everything we do, even when we're cooking, we always focus on iftar. But there's a time before iftar, isn't there? That, too, is part of the act of worship. And respecting that effort is also part of the worship. Appreciating that effort is likewise a part of the worship. When you look at it this way, see, we've grown our worship together. Thank you for bringing attention to this, for highlighting it. That's absolutely right. That's why during Ramadan, it doesn't matter if we're women, men, or children. Everyone, regardless of being a woman, a child, or a husband, has their own essence, their own core, and experiences a sense of fulfillment and peace within themselves. Each person's sense of self. How can we all grow together, honoring and nurturing that sense of self without hurting it? And how can we bring it to a state of true satisfaction and contentment? If you ask me, this awareness alone is enough.
I completely agree. That's very valuable, Professor. There's one more point I'd like to highlight. You mentioned earlier that when individuals join a group, they may lose touch with their own sense of self, but another issue I want to draw attention to is actually the individuality of children. We tend to overlook this as well, because parents often see their children as extensions of themselves, as if they own them. But I think it's important to remember that they are individuals too, that they have their own sense of self, and we should act accordingly. What do you think about this?
That's a great point. When we talk about identity today, we mean all identities, individual, male and female, and also the child's. You're absolutely right. That sense of self is a really difficult thing. Okay, that's an individual, and our desire is to raise them with their own sense of self. No matter how old the child is, every intervention by the mother and father is meant to help them grow and develop. But here's where we run into a problem. That's the hard part. We really struggle with how to unlock a child's potential and, once it's unlocked, how to measure and evaluate in which actual areas they will shine the most. I mean, there are scales developed around the world that measure and evaluate this. Does this child have a talent for music, for art, or for philosophy? Is it something related to engineering, something intellectual, or is it more about manual skills? Is it practical intelligence or theoretical intelligence? There are actually scales that measure all of these things. Therefore, it's important to seek support here, and it's worthwhile to think about how to nurture what we call the child's self, their own inner balance and natural disposition. This isn't something that can be decided by just eyeballing it. We put all our children through a standard educational process with daycare, preschool, and schools. This process actually dulls or suppresses many of these abilities. In other words, education is defined as intentional enculturation. Intentional enculturation, and you intentionally give that culture, the core culture, to everyone. I get that. But after that, when they start to diverge from each other, let's say you direct the 2 or 3 most talented ones in the world toward university. Those with lower abilities are steered toward vocational high schools, and those with even lower abilities don't go to any of them. They just drop out and leave. Almost everywhere in the world, there are similar practices. But that's not enough. That's what I'm saying. It's just not enough. For example, art is kept outside this. For instance, they only take the talented. Even that isn't enough. I mean, a person's.
But there are also skills that can be developed.
Yes, I mean, we need to develop scales. We shouldn't just leave it up to the mercy of the parents. But the parents, I mean, children with special talents. So, while we're discussing IQ, EQ, and all that, there's also something called CQ. That is, curiosity quotient, curiosity intelligence. Children have curiosity intelligence. As we get older, this intelligence dies out. We don't even bother to ask questions anymore. But kids use that curiosity intelligence so much that it can wear us out. So, by nurturing that intelligence, children try to show you their direction and abilities through the quality of the questions they ask and their creativity. Gather up their questions. Let's say they asked 50 questions. Take them and this kid. Aha, these are the questions he is asking. That means this child has talent in this particular area, because we know that humans are not born into the world as a blank slate or tabula rasa. Certain abilities can already exist in that child in terms of intelligence.
Temperament and character.
Temperament and character can differ in each individual. There's potential, but it depends on how you nurture it. It's a potential that you have to develop. That potential isn't about you. It's not about the parents either. That potential is something the child is born with. You can nurture that thing very well, but we really need to pay attention to what exactly we are nurturing. Let's highlight this point when it comes to children's sense of self as well.
So, you're basically saying that we need to really get to know these children and support them in building their sense of self. Lastly, Professor, I'd like to go back to the example you gave at the beginning. You mentioned that when 30 people enter a room, over time they become so similar to each other that they don't even notice the lack of air. They adapt to the environment, lose their individuality, and start to become a collective we. How can someone become aware of this? I mean, how can a person realize, I've lost my sense of self, I've become just like everyone else, and gain the awareness needed to return to being themselves again? How can they recognize this distinction?
It's very easy, very easy. Constantly compare and balance what your mind and your natural disposition tell you with what others are telling you from the outside. For example, when we were young, let's say in high school, I remember we used to pray wearing short sleeves, with short-sleeved shirts or t-shirts. The elders would come and warn us, saying things like, "This is disliked, you know." Even back then, I realized that praying in short sleeves had absolutely nothing to do with something being disliked. And just because of that, I never thought you had to wear long sleeves or cover your head with a cap or something. I mean, with my own logic in nature, my own disposition, I understood that these things had nothing to do with the spirit or reasoning behind worship. Because at that point, your natural disposition and instincts are more gentle, more refined, and they tell you that the logic of worship is something more sophisticated. So, you can see that it has nothing to do with the length of your sleeves or limbs, or the shirt you choose to wear. That's the real criterion. A person's nature, a person's innate disposition. What happens when anything is imposed on what is natural, on what is innate? It turns a person's back, their very being, into ruins. This is what the verse in Surah and Shira is about. That's why, in order not to become ruins, we say a person should occasionally perform a kind of operation on themselves. This is what we call in Shira, relief, expansion of the heart. An operation, a surgery, a dissection, it's necessary to remove and throw out those residues, those harmful things that have been deposited there, so that one's own balance, the balance of the self, the soul, and the conscience, and the I that is established on the balance we mentioned at the beginning, does not get sick, does not turn into a pathological case.
In fact, with conscious awareness, we have the ability to filter these things out, thanks to our innate nature and the way we are created.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Professor. With your insights, we've managed to analyze an important topic. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, today we discussed the concepts of I, we, and self in the context of the 7th verse of Surah Ash-Shams. See you in the next episode. Take care.